guys, this is Janeece back with you to discuss mental health. If you were able to check out the last two videos, you would have been able to see us set a foundation on communication in regards to mental health. Recognizing that there is stigma associated with mental health, recognizing that sometimes discussing your personal experience with mental health is not always the easiest thing to do. With this series, we would like to continue on with this discussion and communicate about some warning signs and the red flags to be aware of within yourself and your family and your friends, community, workspace, okay, because we acknowledge the prevalency of mental health. Today, we're going to kick it off with depression. Understanding that depression is a mood disorder that affects 1 out of 10 adults in the US. It's important to understand that depression is very disabling and it is one of the leading disabilities in the US as well. Depression also affects production. So there's millions of dollars lost in production every year due to depression. This conversation is something that's necessary, and we're going to kick it off with some things that you might notice in yourself or someone close to you who might be dealing with depression. So depression is an unusually sad mood, something that affects your interest. Okay, so it attacks your interest. Anything that you used to do for fun or that you used to do for hobby or even work or even dealing with family has become extremely hard for you, has become extremely draining. We are going to discuss what you might see in different emotions, thoughts, behaviors, and even the physicalness and the effects with depression. So let's get some warning signs as far as the emotions, some things you might see or feel emotional wise. So of course, sadness. Now we have to acknowledge that, yes, depression is something that you can feel when you have the blues, when you're sad about a situation. But again, we have to recognize that daily and everyday blues is different than a disorder. A disorder is when it has lasted for weeks and months at a time and needs to be addressed professionally to help with coping with breaking through that depression. Because like we said, the second that your interests are taken away, that also affects your interest to get better, right? So the earlier the intervention, the better. We understand that it is an unusually amount of sadness, not something that's typical. We have anxiety mixed in there with the emotions, guilt, anger, aggravation, irritation, mood swings, lack of emotional responsiveness, and definitely feeling hopeless and helpless. Okay, you can get to a point where you're starting to feel hopeless. You might start feeling like you can't get out of the situation. All right, and this is when we need to really get some help here. Now let's talk about some thoughts. You're going to have frequent self-criticism, self-blame, worry, impaired memory and concentration, indecisiveness and confusion. And so these are some of the feelings that that you might be having when dealing with depression. Some behavior that you will see is we have some withdrawals from others. That's a huge one. So withdrawal from others, withdrawal from activities that you used to enjoy, withdrawal from responsibilities, and use of alcohol and drugs, which is a big thing here, where we get to talk about comorbidity. So dealing with more than one mental illness at a time. If a mental illness is not addressed, okay, it can definitely lead to another mental illness. If you are dealing with depression, you don't go get help for it. You might not even recognize that you're dealing with it. You have a hard time communicating with others about it. You might start self-medicating, which is using drugs and alcohol or whatever self-harm that might help you cope with what you're dealing with. We understand that that can lead to anxiety as well. So that's the comorbidity piece of it all. And then we have physical effects. So chronic fatigue, lack of energy, sleeping too much or too little, overeating or loss of appetite, weight gain, unexplained aches and pains. These are some of the things that you are going to feel in the physicalness of depression. So we recognize also that depression can has some specifics too as far as the effects. So, understanding that trauma is the leading cause of developing a mental illness. And so, when we think of different traumatic scenarios, we know that maybe breakups can be traumatic, relationship problems can be traumatic, long term poverty can be traumatic, bullying, being a victim of a crime, death of a partner or loved one or family and friend. We also know that depression can show up seasonally. Seasonal depression is something that's very important to understand. And it comes about during the fall and winter months when it's getting darker out and we are having colder weather. It's important to recognize that. As well as my ladies, also, depression can follow during childbirth and after childbirth. So it's important to understand that as well. And 21.9% of women will experience depression during their first postpartum year of having a baby. These are things that are important to recognize with depression. And if you follow along with me to the next video, we will start discussing anxiety and the warning signs and different things that you might see or feel when dealing with anxiety. So thank you for your time, and I'll catch you later. Bye.
This message is brought to you by Prevention Awareness Support Services, or better known as PASS, and the Mental Health and Recovery Services Board of Allen, Allglaze, and Hardin counties.